Everybody ready? I call this November 18th, 2025 Planning and Zoning Work Session to order at 6 p.m. Would you please silence your devices? Next on our agenda is staff comments. Take it away, staff.
All right, thank you, Chair Griswold. I will start off and then turn it over to Courtney. So we have a few new faces in the room, so just kind of a brief recap to how we got here today. Earlier this year, the Commission started discussing our parking code and specifically the off-street parking requirements that it basically, if you have property and you want to build on it or develop on it, depending on what your development is, the code will tell you how many parking spaces are required for you to build into that development. And I think at the very least, there was some agreement that some of those requirements were a little bit excessive. And we did a presentation that kind of talked about the history of parking minimums and how we got them, and I'm not going to go into the pros or cons of that paradigm, as I'm sure that might come up in the Commission's discussion today. But over the course of the year, we've had now 5 work sessions where we've had this conversation, and the conversations kind of were split between trying to identify which areas of land use in our code could be reduced to turning into a conversation of, well, does this paradigm even work? Because it was kind of difficult to come up with those numbers, and so that would lead into the elimination of parking minimums entirely, which is happening around the country in several different cities. And so the Commission kind of went back and forth for a while on that, and eventually got to the point where our office drafted a resolution to bring forth to council that kind of was the more conservative option, where we went through certain specific land uses like multifamily units, hotels, and a variety of other ones that are in the original resolution, which is in the packet today, and brought that forth at the previous planning and zoning meeting to vote. At that meeting, Commissioner Hornseth supplied a couple laydowns, which are also in the packet. One is a substitute resolution, which would eliminate parking requirements altogether. And even though we had several conversations about that in previous work sessions, it was the first time the Commission had seen that resolution, and so the decision at that meeting was to postpone the vote to have this work session to kind of flesh out that conversation a little more. And so when we come back to the meeting, when this comes back up, just a reminder for the Commission, you'll be at the point in the proceeding where Brennan's amendment is up for a vote, and so there'll be a vote to basically accept that amendment or to deny it, and then after, based on that, you would be voting on the actual resolution that would go to council. And so kind of based on that, there's kind of 2 main options. One is to vote down that substitute resolution, and then I would assume we have enough movement to move forward with the original resolution at the very least, or the other option would be to vote for the substitute resolution and pass on that resolution to council. So one recommendation I would have for the Commission tonight would just to get more public input. We've got a great crowd tonight, and continue that debate of which resolution the Commission would prefer. One of the things I said I would do in the meantime would be to connect with administration to see what that might look like with the complete elimination in terms of working with council on that. And so I had some good conversations with my bosses. I even had a council member call who had watched the meeting and talked to me. And so the best advice I can give the Commission based on those conversations is let City Council solve the big picture problems. If the Commission likes the concept of eliminating parking minimums and the research that Brennan has provided, great, just pass that on to Council and see what they think about it. I think there's value in pointing out to Council some of the issues and other reform ideas that are outside the purview of this Commission, because we've had a lot of conversations on it. I think there's a difference between identifying concerns and trying to solve them, and I do think some of our work sessions have gotten to the point of trying to solve these big picture concerns, which is not your job. And so let council consider the big picture of what either type of reform would look like based on what resolution we end up moving forward, because that is what they're elected to do. And so with the uncertainty at the moment with how that vote will go, my second recommendation for tonight would be to identify areas you would want council to consider if Commissioner Hornseth's resolution does end up in front of them. And all that being said, even though parking enforcement is not under the purview of the commission, enforcement might be one of those areas you want to identify. So we did invite Mel and Benny from the Parks and Rec Department, who are here to answer any questions that you might have for them. They also provided a laydown of, I kind of gave them an idea of different questions you might ask based on the previous conversations, and they were gracious enough to actually compile that into a document that if you had a chance to look over today. And then we do have copies for the public as well behind me. And so they are here to answer questions that you might have for them. So thank you for attending. And before I turn it back over to Chair Griswold, I'll let Courtney highlight a few things as well.
Thanks. So in the packet, as Denny's mentioned, we do have the original parking resolution and the substitute resolution and the supporting documentation and research that Commissioner Hornseth has provided. We also provided some aerial images of the sewer downtown area as well as the harbor area per the request of Commissioner Hubbard, who had asked at the last meeting, that we might identify some of the choke points or the areas of parking congestion. And so while those pictures are in the packet, I have them printed out and taped together for full effect if the commission at any point in the discussion with the public tonight would like to gather around the pictures, the aerial imagery, to look and see potentially where the choke points are for parking congestion. Also, there were a few other questions that the commission had requested more information on that you don't see in the packet, and one of those was regarding the ADA requirements. So we conducted further research on this and did not identify any new information beyond what was presented at the November 4th meeting. So as noted at the last meeting and in the materials submitted by Commissioner Hornseth, ADA parking spaces are required for any development that has parking in it. So if parking were to be eliminated and a developer decided not to put in parking, then they would not be required to put in ADA parking. But if they did put any parking in to their development, they would have to have ADA accessible parking spaces. Also, ADA parking may be accommodated within the public right-of-way. So even if there is development, like for example in our current central business district where parking is not required, parking could be developed in the public right-of-way with the appropriate curb cuts and space required. And there is specific guidelines for this in the U.S. Access Board's Public Right-of-Ways Accessibility Guidelines. And if anybody's interested in looking at those guidelines, I do have links to that official website that I can pass on to anybody. And then, because as Danny mentioned, that there are aspects of implementing this potential substitute resolution which would eliminate parking, that would then affect certain areas that don't fall under the Commission's purview, which is one of those being perhaps the implementation of paid parking. Staff didn't look further into the details of what it would require to implement paid parking on 3rd Avenue, but we do know that establishing paid parking on that state-maintained roadway would require coordination with the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities to obtain necessary approvals and permits for installing those meters and signage. If council decides to pursue that option, it's not a guarantee either way. It's just a whatever the council decides if eliminating parking were to move forward. And then I believe those were all the questions that the Commission had voiced at the end of the last meeting that aren't in the packet here, but of course if any additional questions come up, this is the appropriate place to hear those questions from the public and the Commission so that we can discuss that and better inform the decision when this matter comes up for a vote again.
Thank you very much. So reference materials for discussion, I believe, are up in the kiosk, and maybe people have already taken that. And we're going to be addressing the original parking resolution, the substitute parking resolution, supporting documentation and research for the substitute resolution, and aerial images of sewer downtown in the harbor. Those are all reference materials, but you can talk about parking in general if you like. So we have a tremendous turnout tonight. Really appreciate the public coming out. And work sessions are less formal than the regular meetings. So what I would like to suggest that we just pass the microphone around. Would that be okay, Jamie? Just pass it around. It's worked before, and she'll make sure that it's turned on. So would anyone in the public wish to start off the discussion with your comments? And if nobody in the public wishes to speak, the commission can speak, and then during our discussion, you can just raise your hand, and then we'll get the microphone to you. Okay, anyone on commission wish to start off? Would you, Brennan?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, so I just want to say I brought forward the substitute resolution because I felt like we had a lot of information, public comment, evidence that eliminating parking minimums is the right path to take. And so I put together the laydown that has references to our prior work sessions, as well as information provided at those work sessions, and authors provided by community development that all support eliminating parking minimums. And so that's the direction I chose to take, and that's why I brought that forward. And I don't think the original resolution of changing those numbers does anything to really fix the issue. We saw from community development's initial presentation on parking that parking minimums cause land use distortion, increase housing costs, they cause urban sprawl, they have environmental impacts, they have equity issues, and they're really difficult to change because they're so embedded in our code. And also we learned that parking isn't free, even free parking is subsidized. And so with all those effects, just tweaking the numbers isn't fixing any of those. And so doing the research, the best solution to take is to eliminate parking minimums. And that's why I brought forward what I did.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I wanted to have this work session after our last meeting because obviously this laydown that the Commissioner Hornseth brought forward was, we just got kind of last minute on that meeting. And I wanted to just make sure that the public knew exactly what, getting rid of the parking would involve. I feel that we didn't really talk about it, kind of talked about it in the work session before, but we kind of spent effort and glassed over creating a particular plan that we had. But I think that, so we get the data Commissioner Hornseth put out is fantastic. It makes a lot of points. The issue I have with it is, which might be just me or it might be okay, but I feel that once we get rid of parking goes from a right to a privilege. So I just wanted the public to know that if we do this, there's a potential for parking to get monetized. If I were a developer, I would only put parking in and upcharge for my apartments. I would do $50 or $100 more per month for a parking spot and no longer give parking out to anybody. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I just wanted, it to be put out there in the air because it's a big decision we're making, and I wanted us all to think about that for a second. Do we want people to have parking or pay for parking? Assigned parking. Because you can find it on the street, but you might not, your apartment might not come with it. Or you might not be able to afford an apartment building with it. So I just wanted to have that discussion out here before we, really voted on it.
I think the counter to that, not so much counter, but just consideration with that, is that if you have the required mandatory parking areas, you wind up buying larger pieces of land in order to be able to do that development, and that winds up, to me, being even more expensive in the long run for the developer to buy this mandatory piece of land with the mandatory parking, and how much that piece of land winds up costing him and to develop it, I think would wind up being even more expensive than an upcharge to an apartment. Being from an urban area myself, I know sort of the differences of the charging for parking, especially in like in New York City and places like that, which God forbid it ever becomes like that, but here, but the point being is it's a very important thing that, you utilize your land as most efficiently as you can. You put your land, you put your building in and everything that you need to, and you judiciously use the land, whether it's for parking. I think a good developer would put parking in anyway, and maybe upcharge, but it's probably the most efficient use, and he understands, or she understands, the best utilization of his land for the apartments or condos or whatever he's doing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let's just see if anyone else wants to speak first. No? June, any comments?
Yes, I do have comments. One of the comments I have is, just so you all know, this means that if this was passed, no parking would be provided except for what's on the street or what the businesses decide to provide. With that being said, think about what it's like here in the summer. Do you want people trying to park in your parking spaces? Do you want people trying to park all over the street, causing street problems? And you want people to continue parking large, like RVs and things like that, where there's no room. In the winter, we don't have a parking problem. In the summer, yeah, we do. But how many months is there a parking problem?
Thank you. I guess it's my turn. I wrote it up. I support the original resolution 2025-033. The Commission worked hard to address the public's concern about parking minimums for hotels, motels, and multifamily dwellings, and we made meaningful clarifications to the parking code. These amendments are summarized on page 3 of the packet. No code is perfect, but I find this is a good compromise. If the Commission chooses to pursue the original resolution, I do have concerns to discuss later about the included draft ordinance, which differs from the resolution. As noted, the main focus of the substitute resolution is to eliminate all off-street parking minimums and leave optional off-street parking to the discretion of the developer or property owner. Leaving off-street parking to the discretion of the property owner or developer does not take into consideration the changing uses and parking needs of the property over time. Today's vehicle-free resident may be someone who needs off-street parking in the future. Once property is developed, addressing off-street parking needs may be difficult and expensive to implement and manage, and the lack of off-street parking can impact other properties and public right-of-ways. This policy can also encourage short-term gain over long-term sustainability. The substitute resolution also proposes to change hotel, motel, lodge, and inns from an outright use in auto commercial to a conditional use. The effect on the existing lodgings could make them non-conforming uses, a policy P&Z was advised to avoid. The public at the November 4th meeting supported removing parking regulations in the belief that this change would create a walkable, sustainable Seward. No matter how many off-street parking spaces are converted to development, it will not make Safeway or the schools any closer to downtown, or the post office and medical services closer to Forest Acres, or the east side of the bay any closer to town, or town closer to out of town. Eliminating parking regulations, will not change the weather, winter darkness, or reduce wildlife encounters. It will not enable the disabled, provide for families or the elderly. It will not create infrastructure, provide mass transit, or improve street and sidewalk maintenance. Parking minimums do not undermine walkability. Instead, they help get vehicles parked off-street and out of the way of pedestrians. Eliminating parking also eliminates the federal requirement for ADA parking spaces. The substitute resolution proposes providing ADA parking at the ends of each block. ADA parking needs to be as close to the entrance as possible, not at the ends of the block. People with disabilities lose under this proposal. Eliminating parking minimums in Seward is a drastic step backwards, not forwards. In addition to the above comments, I have many concerns about the accuracy and applicability of the documentation and research provided in support of eliminating parking minimums in Seward. I cannot support the substitute resolution. And I go on for a couple more pages discussing the individual research topics presented in the packet, but I will not talk about those now because I do want to hear from the public. One more from Commissioner Hornseth?
Sure. I just wanted to circle back to the discussion of parking spaces being a right versus a privilege, and I think that's a great conversation to start with, since driving's actually not a right, it's a privilege. You are required to get a driver's license before you can drive a vehicle. So therefore, parking should also be a privilege, not a right. Now, let's talk about what our chair just said. The commission did not work hard in determining the best use of our land. Nothing in the resolution does anything to, like I said, actually tackle the issue of land use distortion, increased housing costs, urban sprawl, environmental impacts, equity issues. All right? It does not address that parking is not free, that it's subsidized. My substitute resolution does not actually do anything for public right-of-way parking. It made a suggestion of where ADA parking could occur in the public right-of-way. That's not in my resolution. That's something up for the city to decide. Now, for non-conforming uses also, when we put parking in, we made a bunch of properties non-conforming with those requirements. We know how many non-conforming properties we have. I found 40 just around here, just public in the downtown here. You know, we're talking about, you know, making a couple of hotels non-conforming at the cost of hundreds potentially of non-conforming uses in our current code. You know, I disagree with a lot of what you just said. I think there's a lot of research behind what I put out. That's why all the data's there. You can see it across the country. There's a lot behind this. It can work in Seward.
If we have time, I'd be happy to share some of my concerns with the applicability and accuracy of your research. Okay. We have a brave person sitting in the seat.
A brave and shy person.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Williams. I live outside the city limits and have land inside the city limits. And this really doesn't affect me so much. Sorry. It's on? Okay. I've watched every P&Z meeting for the last over a year, and I appreciate all the work that you guys put into this, and that Mr. Hornseth, the time you've put into this is amazing. Codes are not foolproof by any means, and it's a one-size-fits-all situation. Downtown, you have, I think, 30 by 100 lots, you know, which, let's face it, almost impossible to make this all work. I've got a lot where I have room. I think the end user, you have to define your end user. If I lived downtown, I wouldn't need 2 cars. When I was growing up, I lived down at the beach in Southern California, and I had one parking spot, but I had a work truck, and I had a passenger car. So I bought a city parking permit that allowed me not always to find a parking spot where I wanted, but I found a parking spot and paid for the privilege. And that's what it is when you have more than one car or even one car. So it's a lifestyle choice at times. Living downtown, it's from here to the harbor, it's you really only need a bike. But I appreciate what everybody has contributed to this. I think this is the 5th or 6th go at this. For me personally, I hope to build next year here, and my needs are a little different than everybody else's needs. I'm going to basically need more parking to accommodate what I think is my end users going to be, which meets the existing code. Or so this one size fits all with the code is doesn't work in today's world. And if you look at how the country's going with parking, I mean, from Denver to, I mean, it's just happening everywhere. And it is a privilege to have parking and to drive a vehicle. So, you know, the locals should realize that you need some growth to make this city go forward. And it's not the end of the world to have to pay for a parking pass to live in this awesome town. So, having said that, the code works for me, maybe. It doesn't work for everybody else, and especially when these lots were subdivided 100 years ago. So, you know, this, oh gosh, I thought I silenced it, I'm sorry. So sorry. Gosh darn it. It's my daughter. So, I mean, I would encourage you to look at the way that the trends are going. Again, I appreciate everybody's comments. And Mr. Hornseth, I appreciate all the work you put into this. And I just think it's time to move away from, you know, building codes, because you're just not going to get the growth you need to sustain this city in 10 or 20 years. We need to get young people into this town, and I hope to see it, you know. So thank you very much. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you. We have another brave person who would like to speak. We can pass the microphone around. Yeah. You can stay in the comfort of your seat.
Hi, my name is Tara Anderson. I came to the last work session. I live in town. So I actually wanted to be on time for this meeting, but I actually had to deal with the situation of what happens to this town when you have insane winter weather. I would have liked to have a shorter commute in town, but right now I'm working as a school bus monitor and I have to go all the way past the bridge for my employment. And right now I have an electric scooter that works and a vehicle that needs to get winter tires still, so I can't use it anymore. And my electric scooter, it can't handle any water. It can't handle too much water. There are now like if you go on the sidewalks, there are now like areas that are like totally flooded. It was really scary walking this morning with all the ice. So I think it's all testament to the fact that I love how walkable and bikeable the city is, but there are imperfections. It is not perfect. There are a lot of imperfections. And this includes the fact that I think that we need to make sure that we are not contributing more to sprawl in this community. I have a husband who has a lot of visual impairment and mobility issues, and I actually asked him today, do you want me to have any comments? He focused a lot on that we need to work on, like improving the sidewalks and making sure that they were usable during the winter. Of course, that's going to be a whole other discussion. But definitely we need to make sure that we are not making this town less bikeable or walkable. And there's a lot of I've read some more articles that were provided to me this morning about how even if you are a part of the disabled community, there's only a certain amount of ADA spots that are provided within a huge amount of parking lots. Like 2 to 4% was some of the numbers I was seeing. And so as long as we make sure that we're sticking to the federal guidelines in regards to ADA parking, I think this is a good plan to move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Just to build off of what Tara said,
Could you state your name?
Oh,
please?
sure. My name is Tamara Filipovic, and I live inside city limits. I'm kind of dumbfounded. I have to point out the obvious, but we're not going to lose all the existing parking in town with this amendment that Commissioner Horns has put forward based on the data that has been presented to all of you since last May. The parking that exists will not disappear. The ADA parking spaces that exist will not disappear. Those will remain. So when you speak about all of the worst case scenarios, you make it sound like all the parking and infrastructure that already exists for cars is suddenly going to disappear. That is what you sound like. There's a lot of infrastructure in this town that exists for cars. And what Tara is saying and what other people are saying is that we also need to imagine this town with other types of livelihoods, other types of mobility, and not everyone who has ADA needs is able to drive. Please keep that in mind. And I also want to point out I just want to respond to what Commissioner Charbonneau said. It is not true that laydown came at the last minute for you to review. Commissioner Charbonneau, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you left the meeting before you could hear the last meeting that you all had. The Community Development Office explained the timeline of when the laydowns what is the soonest timeline that the Commission can receive them. And you received the laydown at the earliest possible time that you could, given how the timeline works for receiving them after the packet comes out. And so I just want to point out that is false. You did not receive it at the last minute. And also this data that was presented in the laydown and the revised ordinance has been presented to you since last May. You've had since last May to think about this, to consider it, to sit on it, to reflect on it. It is your responsibility to do those things during that time, and not to accuse Commissioner Hornseth for somehow laying this down on you at the last minute. If you don't have time to review it and reflect on it between Thursday and Tuesday, that is on you. That is part of your work on this commission.
Could we bring this back to the topic of parking?
Yes, it is all related to the topic of parking because it speaks to the work that you are all here to do, which is to consider all of the data that is presented to you and the evidence as comprehensively as you can. And you have been presented that since last May by the Community Development Office and all of the various work sessions you've had with people coming to share their opinions, to share their evidence of how these arbitrary parking requirements affect them and our town. So I just wanted to really clarify that this isn't new, this wasn't last minute, and that this new ordinance and the laydown that you received 2 weeks ago is based on all the data that was presented to you over the past 5 months.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak then. I'm Sky. I live inside of city limits. I did have a few
Sky, your
thoughts.
last name, please?
Livingston.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had a few thoughts while y'all were talking, so I thought I might just go over them. Okay, where to start? I think coming into this meeting, I was kind of like, had this question in my mind of like, what could the town look like without the parking minimums? Like, what could that space be used for? So that's just kind of the lens that I'm coming with, I guess. I also wonder if there are solutions to the parking problem that June Pemberton, I think, mentioned. Because they said that we have a parking problem in the summertime. I'm just wondering if there's like potentially other solutions that don't involve parking minimums. And I think the reason that I'm kind of wondering about that is because, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. The mic in my hand just makes me so scared. Okay, thanks. I think that, I mean, I definitely made a statement to this last week, but I think one thing that we could do instead of the parking minimums is potentially like have a better public transit system, and that's like something that we could move toward. Someone had said something about not having any parking. I can't remember who said that, but I think it is worth saying again that it's not that we won't have any parking, it's that businesses will just decide how much parking is needed. I think it just is worth saying again. And then somebody else had said there's a potential for parking to be monetized, and so I think that it's maybe beneficial to also say that people that don't drive cars are kind of like paying for free parking, like subsidizing free parking anyways, so it's not that it's like free, like I don't drive and I'm paying for everyone's free parking in a sense, so that is also what was coming up. And yeah, I think looking at the overhead images of the town and like all of the space that's just concrete is kind of wild. And even like this one that was in the packet with the red spaces showing all of the parking, it's just so much space, and it just feels like there could be a lot better ways to use all of this land. And kind of like to what Tara was saying, I think when we have to like cover it, like when we're walking and we have to go through these like concrete deserts, it can feel a lot like things are a lot more spaced out and like more dangerous and treacherous, I feel like. But like Chair Griswold said something about you can't make Safeway closer to town, which is true of course, but I wonder if we could have more things along the way, like parks or other smaller businesses and things like that, where folks could kind of stop. And it's not just town and then a massive parking lot and then Safeway. So that's just the thoughts that I have so far. So, anybody else?
I'm sitting here quietly. I'm Dolly Dieter, I live on 2nd Avenue. And my big concern, just first off, this is an old city, or farm, village, whatever you want to call it. It's designed at a time when nobody had cars. Very few had cars, so the streets are narrow. There isn't a lot of off-the-street, good parking. Most of us on 2nd park in front or back in the alley and hope that, nobody else is going to park in our place because that's where we live. But we have no right to that area out in front. It's public land. So how are you going to turn somebody away? And yet we need parking to get to a job or whatever it may be. And 3rd Avenue is just a disaster waiting to happen. It's so overparked, with people cutting across, motorhomes, as you pointed out, motorhomes parked at the end of the street, so you can't possibly see what traffic is coming. So you have to pull out into the traffic to see, and then you get honked at and screamed at. Rightfully so, you don't belong there, but you can't see the traffic otherwise. And until we do something about 3rd Avenue, all these other things seem to me fall away. We're always going to have developers. That's basically what this town's about right now. And that's fine, but they have to help us solve the problem, not create the problem. And that's what to me is happening. It's, wait a minute, we have a hotel, you're only going to give them a half a space per unit? Where are they going to get the other half? From their neighbor? It doesn't make sense to me. You tell somebody that has a bed and breakfast that they have to have one space per unit, and then you tell a hotel they only have to have a half of one. There's obviously going to be more cars at a hotel than at a bed and breakfast. So I think that sometimes we don't look far enough in the future to say how this is going to go and what we're really doing. But 3rd Avenue is a mess. With blind spots, it's a lot of traffic, there's parking on both sides of the street that just overwhelms the driver. So people now take 2nd as a bypass. Speed limit 25, 90% of the people are doing 35. It's not just a little parking problem. This is a city-wide problem. And it's not, I don't think that your resolution solves that all. I think it's a good start, and I don't envy you your job to solve this, because I don't think it's solvable. Well, that's enough and more than I should have said. Somebody else?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michelle Kowalski. I live outside of city limits, but own a business in city limits. And I have to admit, I'm coming late to this discussion, so I am trying to get caught up, and so I might ask for some help. I'm just trying to imagine, what it would be like to have 2 hotels go in downtown without any parking requirements. Just trying to imagine, what the reality would be. One of the businesses that I own is right next door to it, but I think is going to maybe become a hotel. And I just think about parking right now, and if there's no minimums, what it would look like. And so maybe help me out. Is that the plan? If this were to go forward, there were no minimums, so therefore, folks who went to a hotel, they would just find parking wherever they could downtown? Is that what we're looking at? Or maybe help me out.
Well, our regulations require a conditional use permit for hotels in the central business district. So the commission would decide how much parking, and based on public input, how much parking should be required. And right now, we're going for a half a space per unit.
Yeah.
And that would be a guidance, I suppose, but it only applies to hotels in the auto commercial where it's an outright use. But any hotels in commercial, in the central business district and the harbor would require a conditional use permit.
Could I say something to Michelle? Oh, yeah. I'm Susan Swiderski,
and I have to leave. I'm supposed to be somewhere at 6:45. But I'm for the change, and my thoughts are that, excuse me, it does get your heart rate going when you get this thing. The commercialism, the hotel will want customers that have they want parking for their customers, so they will provide parking. They will have to find a way, just like KFT did way back when they bought a lot and started busing people to give them their parking places. Bed and breakfasts, they know that they have to have parking, so they will clear out part of their yard or whatever in order to provide that parking if that's what's required. I just feel like, the commercial business needs to be able to go forward and build, and they will have to find the parking by purchasing or providing in some way. And that's what they do in big cities. I mean, I've stayed in hotels where I have to park for the cheaper parking down the block at that parking garage that hotel uses, or I can pay the valet and they go park my car. But I know we're a small town, but I'm for the progress in that direction, and I'm also for the paid parking in downtown. I know it's congested and we're not used to it yet with all of the on-street parking, but I think that will again have to find a way to be resolved. So anyway, I gotta go.
Thank you very much.
Chair Griswold?
Conditional use permit is always the last say. So the commission and the city council has the last say. They know there has to be parking, so they get to administer that.
And actually, it stops here, council doesn't
Doesn't
get to
It starts with
help.
you guys, right?
It starts and ends with us. That's one of our duties. We decide on conditional use permits. Thank you.
And
excuse me, just a sec. Did you want to say
I would
something?
just answer your question a
Okay.
little more in detail. Because, the thought of eliminating parking minimums can be scary for those types of questions. We've got about a decade now of 2,300 towns across the country have done this. Only 4 have backtracked. And so now we're far enough along where we're being able to look at, and that's what some of the research Brennan has provided to show that, for the most part, developers are going to provide the parking that they want their customers to have. You might have a few bad apples here and there are checks and balances that you can have, one being the conditional use permit process, which actually is working right now in the central business district, because I don't know if people realize it, but Seward is one of those towns that have already in part eliminated parking minimums, because in central business and our Harbor Commercial District, our 2 busiest districts, it's already eliminated. There is no parking requirement in those 2 districts. And the reason that you see hotels allowed outright in auto commercial zoning district, but a conditional use permit in central business and harbor commercial, is because the code currently dictates what a hotel in an auto commercial zoning district is required to provide, but since it doesn't, and that's one of the, this type of reform should never be done in a vacuum, and so you want to have bigger picture conversations, and one of those is, what land uses are you concerned about if a bad apple developer is going to, and the hotel's a big one, because that's a lot of parking spaces that if they're just not going to provide, they're going to take up spots, and so that's where you want to have that conditional use permit process in there, and so that way, even though parking's not required, we're still vetting the parking plan of that developer, and if the commission agrees with it, great. If not, they can put a condition that says, we'll accept this permit, give you this permit, but you do have to require this many parking spots. And so a lot of towns go that route with it, so it's not just done in a vacuum. But currently right now, central business, you're not required to provide parking unless you have a land use that requires a CUP, and then you might need to, depending on the commission's decision.
what's a CUP?
Conditional use permit.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, due to some of my understanding with psychology, I'm always kind of trying to look into incentives over punishments. And I wonder if one thing we could look into for the paid parking that's already available is maybe there's a way to provide a discount for, if you go and, go ahead and go to a small business. Maybe you could set a minimum that they have to buy, but the idea is that they can get some of their parking fees back if they they actually contribute to local economy, for instance. And I was just thinking, what was your name again? Dolly. So one thing that I was remembering with, Dolly was mentioning a lot of the issues with 3rd Avenue, and I was just reminded that 3rd Avenue basically functions as something that a lot of urbanists, YouTube channels have mentioned, something called strode. Basically a road that can lead to a lot of accidents because of all the, basically you have a lot of places where people are basically backing out of their business or their house. It's already a place that probably already kind of has an issue just the way it's constructed. Based on what we already have in regards to infrastructure here, the only solutions I can provide for that is probably looking into, there's a lot of places that we could probably put in bike lanes to make it so that it's possibly a place where we might consider occasionally decreasing speed so that you can have bike lanes there. And then basically encourage more people to use alternative uses of transportation in order to not have it as bad of a traffic and accident-prone area. But yes, I do agree with Dolly that we definitely don't want to be encouraging more places where people are going to have issues with parking, but we also have to think about people who don't have to have parking, that already have some sort of alternative transport, whether themselves or their bike or their scooter or whatever. Thank you.
I would really like to see the development of a transportation plan that would incorporate all these ideas, and we could identify, as these maps would help do, where are the crunch points, where do people need to go, where do we have sidewalks, where do we need sidewalks, where enforcement is really important. Believe it or not, the property owner adjacent to the sidewalk is responsible for maintenance of their sidewalk in front of them.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that transportation plan is definitely places where you have an obstruction in the sidewalk. There's a lot of that right on 4th Avenue, a lot next to actually the paid parking. I could probably add pictures at some point of those places. Anyway, anyone else?
Well, Dolly Dieter again. I really, I walk a lot around town. I walk an awful lot in the alleys because they're not in traffic. And, it's because of this very thing she's talking about. The sidewalks are not well maintained. Let's face it, if you're going to lose a lot of salt on them, the concrete's not going to hold up. I can only sympathize with the city for trying to keep up with it. I think the guys that plow our streets do an excellent job. They're at it immediately. They, clean it off. They don't have this big berm in front of your house or back of your house, whatever. But there's so many little things about, we allow these motorhomes to park right on the corner, and you can't see around them. There's building. People have shrubberies that keep you from, and it's those things that keep people from using alternative walking capability. How you ride a bicycle in that is beyond me. You're right on these obstructions before, you could totally stop. There's an awful lot to this that isn't just going to get cured with one resolution. And I think that we need to look at the traffic, and we definitely need to look at how people park on these. We park right to the corner. And when I said something to the city people about this, they said, well, we can't afford to lose parking spaces. But we can afford to lose people if they get hit. I mean, come on. you know, I like to walk, I'm all with you, so, somehow or other you have to clean up the problems that's not one fits all.
And many of those issues are beyond our authority, so but it's good to get it out in the open for future. Go ahead.
Sky again, hello. Okay, this is less scary the second time. Okay, so I think that, like, eliminating the parking minimums kind of makes the town less car-centric, you know, because then, like, we're not putting such a focus on parking, and then that kind of solves some of these problems that these two are talking about in a small way. Because I think a lot of what I'm hearing anyways, like the chaos and what I've experienced myself, is because of all of the cars trying to park and trying to get out of parking and all of that. So that's just what's coming up for me. I think that it's like a long road, so it's not like we're going to eliminate parking minimums and then all of a sudden like all the problems will be fixed with everything, but I think it's like a step in the right direction. So just wanted to put that in there. Okay, I'm going to put it back.
We do have staff from Parks and Rec, and they have provided a nice handout describing the parking in the harbor area. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about the effectiveness of providing these parking spaces. There's been some concerns that it's a waste because it's just so seasonal, now it's empty all winter. But would you like to address the very busy seasonal parking lots in the harbor?
Sure. I probably won't speak towards it being a waste, but in the summer months, enforcement in at least the central lot area seems to be well received by the people who utilize those areas, and it's a little contentious with the other folks who work out in the harbor area. But it has been effective. Parking enforcement has been effective in opening up spaces. There is a little, like I said, really contentiousness with the community relations, but thank you. But I believe as we have worked through this process, and they have, I think parking enforcement gets not such a great name in some areas, because it's almost like a predatory practice. It's not that much parking, and hey, park here, haha, gotcha. And we kind of dealt with some of that when we started enforcing consistently. But I think we have a pretty empathetic approach considering we all live in this community, and we're trying to bridge the gap. We didn't invent these rules. I'm just doing my best to enforce them and be fair to everybody. And we do have, we do understand that forcing, or I don't want to say forcing, I apologize. We do understand that taking away avenues of parking or having less parking and leading to the option of having a permit system can cause some burden on folks. So we do have permits that are tiered and priced accordingly to folks, just to try to help our community and bridge the gap between what we are told to do as far as our job enforcement and also being empathetic and understanding what's going on. The folks that reside in this community and are here around the year have more benefits towards their permits. We are a tourist town, so those are kind of the ones on the pricier end. Yeah, and I'm open to ask any other questions if you might have any.
I was sad to read on the last page the trends.
Oh, yeah.
That was really sad.
Yeah.
Are those mostly from residents that are giving you grief?
I cannot attest to most folks' residency areas, but it's just a blanket thing, and I understand it to an extent, you know. But one thing I do want to add, we are speaking about a little bit of downtown issues, and I would urge folks to consider, as far as enforcement comes, the difference between public or private areas. If we are going to try to enforce parking in the city in downtown areas, I would advise maybe to open, or I would suggest, I apologize, but I would suggest to open a separate department. It'll be a task. Maybe look to automate it a bit. maybe swear some people in on the law enforcement portion to give more of a authority to it, because like, as I mentioned, those are public streets downtown. That's kind of a whole separate burden there.
But it does seem that the parking in the harbor has been very successful. That tourists find a place to park.
Yes, ma'am.
Get them off the streets.
Yeah, so far
Boats,
since I've been...
trailers, RVs.
Yes, we try to keep areas clear, especially during holidays or festivals. We tend to get very full. Emergency avenues, emergency right-of-ways can get blocked by large motorhomes. That seems to be a very common trend in the center lot as well. You come into the center lot to visit a business and you can't really turn. You got to be very careful to turn. There's a large motorhome in the way. It's not huge issues, but they're small things that, if aren't paid attention to, can get out of hand and affect us negatively.
Appreciate your job.
Yeah, thank you.
Works. Any other questions for Parks and Rec?
That was a fake one, huh?
That was a fake.
Randy McFarland, outside the city limits. I'd like to refer to this thing about the number of parking spaces and stuff. There's at least 1,200 parking spaces down there in the harbor. At least 1,200 that could be used for paid parking. And this is off-street parking. According to the city's map, there's a little over 29 acres of available parking. Of course, I personally count Boulder Field. Parks and Rec doesn't use that for parking cars, but like under Mermaid Festival, they should be directing people to Boulder Field to get them out of their car. They need to, it's not all about enforcement, it's getting people into a parking spot. They've got to switch hats once in a while, in my opinion. And you folks, I forgot what you guys are called, Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm sorry. If you're going to be in charge of what's required for off-street parking or business parking, how much requirement, how come you guys aren't in charge of what the prices are in the permits? It's really baffling to me, and paid parking means a lot to me, because it just does. I'm weird. In my opinion, there's only one choke point in the harbor, and that's the north lot. Fills up by 9 o'clock, 9:30 every day. I know that when I parked cars, there was 41 employees in that lot. I would sure like to see all the, where all the permits are being used. I believe with the tracker, is that true that you can tell which lot that you found a permit in? Is that true?
What lot the person is parked, we wouldn't know that information unless that person is actually cited a citation, and that information is on the ticket. There is technology out there that we have not adopted yet, that other communities do use, that you can track where people are going throughout your city. That's probably a separate conversation.
On your website, it says for the parking that there's a permit for commercial use of $350. I imagine most of those people are parking in the center lot. Is that true?
Yes, there's about 6 spots in the center lot that are an extended amount of time that are there's.
So technically it is used for paid parking?
Essentially.
Okay. Those spots I sold, that you're selling for $350 now, sold for $500 in 1996. Okay? I only had 2 people. Ray's bought one, so they could have their, they run out of mayonnaise or whatever. You know what I mean. And there was a boat owner who bought one, didn't care how much it cost, he wanted to be right next to his boat. Okay? So that parking at the time was $3, now it's $10. So the spot that was $500 in 1996 now should be sold for $1,675, and I know a lot of you are just gonna say, wow, that is crazy. $1,675 for a parking spot? That's just life. We're talking 30 years ago, and the prices went down by almost 40%. It should have been, even on the city's own paperwork, a parking spot is worth at least $1,200. When they have mobile vendors, they sell the spot for $1,200 in the parking lot. So, that's the minimum value. You charge the little kids selling popsicles on a bicycle. Oh, he was a roving vendor and he didn't have a parking spot, but basically it's the same thing. One can move, one can't. One gets a city parking spot. We're charging $1,200 for a kid to sell popsicles, but we're giving Ray the same spot for $350. Something is not making sense there.
All these prices are decided by council, and we have nothing to say.
I know, but I'm asking why you don't put it in there, because
it's a council
a
matter.
bridge too far.
They set the fees and permit prices.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, thank you.
I just want to add to what Randy was saying, that to your comment about the pricing should concern you, because it's directly related to the parking that you have and that you want to develop more of, that you want to continue supporting, subsidizing something that's losing the city money, and that the rest of us are paying for.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak from the audience? Okay, bring it back to the commission. Any further comments?
Courtney?
Sure. Would you mind if I make a comment, kind of addressing some of the comments from the public? So in recent research that I've been doing, I've been learning that when we base our decisions on the assumption of abundance, that abundance being assuming that there's an abundance of land or an abundance of money, that we tend to make poor planning or development or economic decisions. But when there are limited resources, limited money, people are compelled to be more creative and thoughtful in their solutions. And so parking minimums is an example of a poor solution based on the assumption of abundance, based on the assumption that there's abundance of land to provide parking, an abundance of money to provide parking. But this is a poor solution to a lot of issues related to congestion due to vehicular traffic that we can come up with creative solutions for. And so some of these solutions to vehicular traffic and congestion would be, as some of you have mentioned tonight, improved sidewalk maintenance, shared parking agreements with current parking lots that may only be used on the weekends for church services or what other uses there may be, improved lighting on the streets for pedestrians, installing bike lanes, having paid parking, better signage for time limits on parking and enforcement, permits for residential parking. So all of these things are solutions that we can consider that are entirely unrelated to requiring parking minimums. And parking minimums do actually encourage more driving, which then adds to these issues that we're trying to find a solution for. And then finally, I just want everyone just to imagine the downtown as it currently is, and then consider if we were to put in parking lots to address the parking congestion that we have, and what that does to the character of our downtown. It completely destroys that character, and so just want you to keep that in mind.
Well, I'd like to take this time to address some of my concerns with the substitute resolution. Let's see where I was. It's a very extensive document, and I just find that I disagreed with everything, just about. The graph used on page 54 of the packet to show that parking minimums conceal the true cost of parking are based on parking situations that do not exist in Seward. Yet the high cost of big city parking lots that are underground and 2 to 4 level structures are averaged in with the relatively inexpensive suburban parking, resulting in a cost range from $600 to $5,000 a year per parking space. These figures and situations do not seem to apply to Seward. Does Seward even have suburban parking? Applying the high nationwide parking cost to Seward is not valid. What are the costs of not providing off-street parking in Seward? The map used on page 55 that tries to demonstrate too much off-street parking primarily shows the Harbor Commercial District, a district that does not require parking unless by conditional use permit. The city showed great foresight to provide paid parking on all of those city parking lots. Other parking areas on the map include the location of the new cruise ship terminal, parking in the public right-of-way, and the Alice and Boulder campgrounds. Obviously, not all the red areas on this map are off-street parking, which is misleading. Those that are parking lots are needed and used, some year-round and some seasonally. This is not a valid demonstration of too much parking. The example used on page 56 and also at the May 20th work session is used erroneously to show that parking requirements stop a developer from maximizing their 30 by 100 foot property downtown in AC with a 1,500 square foot mixed-use retail store development on the first floor, an office on the second floor, and a 3-bedroom unit on the third floor. Actually, the code only allows a single-family residence to be built on a 3,000 square foot lot in the AC downtown. While that structure could indeed be supersized, 3 stories, 20 by 75 foot home, code only requires a minimum of 2 parking spaces, which could fit in the front and rear setbacks in this extreme example. The 18-foot parking space is 162 square feet, not 172 square feet as stated. Parking is allowed in any required yard area. Only in residential districts is parking not permitted within 5 feet of any side property line. A home footprint that is 3 feet shorter could easily allow 3 vehicles to park off-street in the front and 1 in the back. Parking minimums do not cause land use distortion. Parking lots, when designed for the requirements of Seward's parking code, do not take up more land than the buildings they serve. On pages 58 to 59, the research to support the statement that much of Seward could not exist if rebuilt today is not true. The list of downtown properties is not much of Seward. The document states that all do not have the required number of off-street spaces required by current code. The list includes many older, non-conforming buildings that were built before the code requirements. As these older homes are replaced or lots subdivided, the new homes do comply with the parking regulations. Many of the properties listed actually have space in their yards for off-street parking that was not listed. Some are not following their required CUPs for parking plans and choose to park in the right-of-way instead. The use of the public right-of-way for parking is not currently restricted except for scheduled and noticed snow removal or street maintenance. Until this use is changed, it is not illegal to park along the street. The claim on page 61 to 62 that parking minimums are bad for the environment is not supported. Vehicles are bad for the environment, not parking minimums. Parking minimums do not require personal vehicle use. They provide off-street spaces for existing and future vehicles, whether residents, visitors, or commuters. Page 64, parking minimums are overkill in seasonal towns. This is like saying a house doesn't need a roof when it's not raining. The paid parking lots in the harbor are critical to the seasonal tourism economy and thriving businesses. The city showed great foresight to set aside city land for paid parking in the harbor. It is not overkill. Page 64, parking minimums favor one development over another. Developers have many more critical considerations than parking minimums, such as location, cost, economy, and profit. The original resolution reduces multifamily dwelling parking requirements to 1 space per unit and hotels to 0.5 spaces per unit in response to some developers' concerns. Seward residents do not determine what developers build as long as it conforms to code. It's a free market system. Page 67, parking minimums undermine missing middle housing. Townhouses, apartment complexes, condos, duplexes, triplexes, and more are all either illegal or difficult to build. And one of the chief reasons is because of Seward's parking minimums. All illegal or difficult to build. City Council responded to requests for true 3- and 4-story buildings for apartments and mixed-use apartments, commercial developments, and a sweeping 38-foot building height for every zoning district. Council approved attached and detached accessory dwellings for single-family dwellings, gateway plans to build townhouses and multifamily dwellings. Phoenix Heights continues to build triplexes and fourplexes. The original resolution will require 1 space per multi-family unit, which is a reasonable compromise. High mortgage rates, high building costs, shortage of building supplies, shortage of contractors, lack of infrastructure, cost of utilities, financial instability, inflation are all more significant issues than parking minimums. The U.S. Census data for 2023 reported that the largest share of households in Seward have 2 cars. Seward does not have a year-round, reliable, affordable, and convenient mass transit system or a system of safe, well-maintained sidewalks and bike paths that would encourage less use of vehicles. The goal needs to be addressed in community discussion on how and where to establish a network of safe streets, sidewalks, and bike paths designed for all users and mass transit to improve walkability. It does go on. I had comments on every single bullet, but I won't take your time on this. But I do question the applicability and the accuracy of his underlying research as it applies to Seward.
Chair Griswold, can I say something?
Yes, you may.
One thing I want to say is, I'm June, and I used to come visit here all the time before I moved here, and I moved here in 2014. I love Seward. One of the most wonderful things about Seward right now is the inclusivity. I love that there's places where people who can't ride bikes or ride scooters or walk for long times, because maybe they're on oxygen, who knows, they have a disability. Not all disabilities are visible. And they can go to most places now. But if this is passed, what I am afraid is that places where, yes, there's parking now, but when they don't need parking, there's businesses that don't need parking, they can say, well, we're just going to take these parking spots away and let them park on the street. And then you're, one here and one here, and that's it for handicap at the end of the street. The business is in the middle of the street. It's slushy, it's cold, it's blowing, and you want somebody on oxygen to walk down that street or be rolled down that street in a wheelchair. If they want to go to that business right now, it's pretty inclusive, and I see this as making it non-inclusive. That's one of my main concerns. I think we need some kind of parking. I like the other idea we have, and I think working together, we worked together on that. There was a lot of time put into it, in here and out of here, by a lot of different people. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Yes, Brennan.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to a couple things. I think we can talk about minor inaccuracies in the data presented. You know, I did the best I could, but it's going to have a couple small things. That doesn't take away from the argument that it's right. It's been done in literally thousands of cities across the U.S. We haven't had these problems that have been presented as end-of-the-world things. That's not going on in these cities that have done this. Yeah, like I said, there's going to be minor inaccuracies in every little bit, but it doesn't take away from the full picture that removing these parking minimums does a lot more good than harm. And in fact, we are suffering from the harm of over 40 years of having these parking minimums in place. And that has led to a lot of the problems we're seeing today. And, you know, sure, we're getting some missing middle developed in new developments, but where's the development happening downtown? Where's the infill happening? That's not being allowed right now because we can't do it. And parking is a really big thing that developers have come to us and said, this is holding back. We've literally had developers in our work sessions telling us that to our face. So it is something that is holding them back. A lot of our regulations are. We cannot say that it's not holding them back. It is what is holding back infill. One of the major things holding back infill in this town.
We did make changes. We said instead of this complicated formula for multifamily housing, it's one parking space per unit.
We changed 2.5 to 2. That's not a big, complicated undoing a change. No, that's still a very complicated change. You have a whole table that you have to reference. We don't even know how mixed use works, right? You have to do all these other things. No, it's a very complicated table that a developer has to go to community development to understand the requirements before they can even decide to build, versus deciding themselves on what they think the best use is. And on top of it, if you have a business and you want to sell it to and change it to something else, you want to turn your hair salon into a bowling alley, you're now going to have completely different requirements. So guess what? That's not going to happen because they're arbitrary. All of them are arbitrary. None of them are based in real data. That's the entire process. Like, that's the entire problem, is they're all just arbitrary. They've been made up. If you do your actual research and you see where these numbers came from, they are completely bogus. Somebody tried to tie how many parking spaces you need to square footage of a property. And what they found was there was no correlation at all. But that's what's been copied and pasted across the USA, is something based on no correlation being used everywhere. And that's why we have the problem we have today.
Anyone else wish to speak? Okay. Anyone in the audience wish to speak? Go ahead.
I would argue that the statement that parking does affect the environment, I would say it actually does affect the environment because, first of all, concrete, very high CO2 contributing process. Secondly, the more parking space you put in, the more you're like discouraging businesses in homes to put in more like gardens or keep native trees, for instance. As well as it does encourage more car use. So I would say that's claiming that parking doesn't affect the environment, I think is false. Lastly, I think in regards to Ms. Pemberton, I would say I think we need to find a way to survey more on residents in regards to how many residents actually need to use cars who are part of the disabled community. Because for instance, in order to have, sometimes if you need a specific type of vehicle or in order to be able to use a wheelchair, for instance, you have a specific type of van in order to actually be able to drive and use those parking spaces then. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I thought we might be here till 10, but it looks like we're going to be done early tonight. So if no one else has any comments or further discussion, I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 7:24 PM.